Let me show you how easy it is to design great-looking custom user interfaces for generate asset blocks natively in MindStudio. I'm going to walk through how to build one for this workflow. And this workflow, what it does is a basic data source query template. This is actually in templates. And what it does very briefly is a person asks a question, it processes that question and queries the data source and then displays the answer. We're going to build this block here that displays the answer, the generate asset block. And we're going to do it in a form of HTML, even though the generate asset block can generate images, video, and PDFs. In this demo, we're going to build HTML. And we're going to build this as if it was from scratch. So I'm going to come over here and create a new generate asset block. Oh, and before I dive into that, I should show you a little bit of what the output might look like. This is an example of the current run, and this is what a generate asset block looks like in HTML format. And you can see that it's very clean, it's easy to read, and the way I've designed this is I use a specific template, which I'll show you how to use, your own templates, whereby it's there's no logo, there's no specific color branding. I use this as my template for video demos where it's easy to read and clean, but it's not specifically for any company or anything else like that. We're going to build something similar to this. So now that I've created this, just place this generate asset block, first thing that we do is come over to Markdown text format as a source type and select custom user interface. And we're going to keep these settings where we're going to display to the user. You could display this, render this as a variable, and then, for example, email it or do something else with that asset. But for now, we're going to display this to the user, and then we click on Design User Interface. And if you saw the video demo that I did recently on how to generate a custom user interface for a user input block, this will look familiar to you, where on this right side is a preview of what you are building, and then on the left side is a chat style interface where you literally use natural language to interact with a large language model to build or vibe code your custom user interface. So first thing I'm going to do is, and as a point of a note, is that this right side only displays the preview. And also, what some people may not realize is that when this is previewing your content, the large language model does not literally know what is being displayed in this preview. The large language model is separate from this preview and does not, like you and I are looking at it, and does not recognize it. So what you often have to do is, if there's an error or if there's something that's not displaying correctly, you need to instruct the large language model as you are chatting with it to say, this is not displaying correctly, even though you say that it is. And the large language model does not know what is being displayed. So imagine that you're talking to someone else on the telephone or something like that and instructing them how to build it, that they do not have visibility to your preview. So I'm going to start this preview right now, and it's loading up the development environment to be able to run the preview. And while it's doing that, I'm going to do two other things. One is I'm going to select a more robust model. And my favorite model here, here's a tip that I like to do in general, is I like to build my initial one-shot or initial maybe 2 or 3 first drafts using a Claude model. In this particular time, I like using Claude 4.5 Opus because it is the current state-of-the-art for coding at the time of this recording. But then, when I am sometimes troubleshooting stuff, you can very easily change models when coding this content, and that's very beneficial in a way because these models obviously are trained differently and they behave differently. One thing that I find does really well is Google Gemini 3 is a great troubleshooting model. So I build with Claude and then I troubleshoot with Gemini, and in between that I may be offering compile. So let me first come over here and select this. Maximize the response size, and when you see this interface here, you know that this is ready to display a preview. So now the next thing, I mentioned that I was going to do two things. The first one was going to select a new model to vibe code my initial draft. The next thing, which is very important for generate asset blocks and unique to generate asset blocks, is you need to import test data. This button right here. The reason why you need to import test data is you need to inform, quote unquote, inform the large language model of the variables that are being used in your workflow, for one, and then for two, it needs to have visibility to the data types and structure of that data. So it needs to understand that when you ask it to display my report, well, is that report written in Markdown? Is that report written in HTML? Is that report written in JSON, as examples? Before I do that, though, I told you that in this demo, I was going to pretend that we were building this from scratch for the very first time. Let us pretend that I do not have any test data. I've literally built this workflow for the very first time, and I need to first run test data. So one moral of the story to take in this lesson is, before you actually start building with this generate asset block, and notice how I have it separate from the workflow. I can still build even though it's not connected to the workflow yet, is I need to first generate some test data. One way I can do that is I can use this awesome feature that is part of Debugger, where I can add a breakpoint. And I will add a breakpoint after this. What this means is, notice here, of course, in this workflow, this is the generate asset block, and I want to put a breakpoint on the block immediately preceding that generate asset block. So I will add that breakpoint after. What this means, notice how a little red dot appears here. If it was before, it'd be on the left side. What this means is this will run and stop after this block executes and completes its data. And that then means that this workflow in this generate asset block now has test data all the way up to this point. So the moral of that story is that when you're building this for the first time and you intend to use a generate asset block, first run this with some test data, put a pause here. And the second moral of the story is your test data needs to be as expected for your workflow, meaning you do not want errors in your test data. If you are getting errors in your test data, then debug all of this content up to this point when you want to use the generate asset block. So notice here, I've of course already run test data. I've already built this, but let me show you how this looks then. I'm going to come back to the design, to the interface. Now import test data. And now notice here that these are different workflows, and you can see here that these are paused because of breakpoints. That this is test data that is successfully completed up to this point that I can now give to the generate asset block to say, this is the content of that test data. And this is the actual variable that I want to have it render. Remember how I showed you this demo here of what this looks like. It says best practices for structured prompting techniques, blah, 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 blah. You can see that this is the content that is rendering in Markdown to do this. And the name of that variable is process response. We're going to inform when we start generating this custom user interface that this is the variable that we want to use. So I'm going to select import. And now notice how it says, this message here says initialize with test data. That means that it now knows about this test data. And you can select, you obviously want to select a run that has successful test data, not one that has an error in it. So now I'm going to specify and this instruction, you can write any kind of instruction you want. I'm writing this instruction specifically for this use case, for this data source query. So obviously you can tell that it's important to have the variable names correct. Notice this other syntax that I use. Notice how I use this backward apostrophe or this tick around the variable name. What this means is this is informing the large language model that this is separate from the instruction itself. This is literally the name of the variable versus anything else that's around it. It's the equivalent of when you are writing prompts to using XML tagging around your variable names. That is the equivalent of writing to the large language model when generating custom user interfaces. Now, sometimes it is helpful. I only do this when I'm debugging, but sometimes it's helpful to literally paste that structure there, but I'm going to one-shot this and see what it comes up with. Now notice here, I'm going to pause here to note that I'm trying to one-shot this, and you don't have to one-shot this, meaning you don't have to get this correctly the very first time you try making a user interface. I'm just showing you some techniques that help me one-shot this instead of going back and forth. Namely that I know that when I submit this, and if I don't specify that this is a Markdown format, it will properly render the output, but it will literally render the Markdown syntax. And I don't want it to show Markdown syntax. I want it to look like beautiful content. Like we know here, when I showed you this, that this is Markdown format. This is like a #1 tag for level 1 in Markdown. And that is what's being represented here. If I do not specify that this is Markdown, it will literally show you the hashtag and all the syntax. I don't want that. I want it to render beautiful HTML. I'm going to inform that in my one-shot to see how well it comes out. And you can, as you use this tool, which is very powerful, you learn some of these techniques to help you get output faster. So now I'm going to show you, remember I mentioned to you how I use this template. There's that functionality that I mentioned in my last video where you can import this style guide, but I don't need to do that. I can one-shot this by providing that style guide right away. And I have that in a separate text edit file that I reference all the time, which is why it's helpful to have some of this content in separate text edit files or notepad files, what have you. And I'm going to provide it right now. And I just paste it in, and now I'm going to hit enter, and let's see what it comes up with. Not good. So let's see what's going on here. Oh, there it is. It just took a moment to refresh. You noticed how it paused and refreshed again and refreshed again and refreshed again. It's loading up that data. So here we see the how it looks like already in beautiful HTML. I did a fairly good job in one-shotting this. And you can, as you learn how to use this tool, you will be able to get content that looks really good on the first time that you use it. And this, it just takes practice. It looks great, but before I end this video, I need to explain one other thing. Notice how there is this message right here that explains custom interface. Custom interface has uncompiled changes. What that means is that this preview is literally only a preview. It is not committed or attached for a non-technical term. It is not attached to the block. In this case, it generates asset block. But you also need to do the same thing for user input blocks. You need to make sure that you compile the data, or if you are creating a custom user interface for checkpoint blocks. Those are the 3 different model types that you can make custom user interfaces in MindStudio today. You need to make sure that you click this compile. Notice what happens when I do. Now it compiles that message goes away, you get this other message, and this thing will take a moment to refresh. So here's another little tip that I've learned is there are times when this preview is not literally displaying the preview currently. What sometimes happens is it initially shows you the output like we saw, and then it displays it again. But often also what happens is that if I continue interacting with this and making different changes, it will display an older version of that content. What sometimes it helps fix that is to either click this refresh button or refresh MindStudio in this browser and then see what happens here. What I sometimes find is that even though it may not be displaying this preview correctly, I still click compile because the code may actually be there. But like I mentioned earlier, remember, this preview is separate from the large language model and the actual code here. Let me tell you another tip before I finish this video. You have access to this code right here. When you find that there are different issues that you have. So for example, there have been times where I work with a specific client that I will make custom user interfaces that require scraped content. And in that workflow or in that agent, what sometimes happens is that scraped garbage content will display at the end of the output, which is obviously not something that we want. Once I did fix it, and I found that it was working correctly, consistently, I copied that code, pasted it into a text edit file for later reference for whenever I have a similar situation. The moral of the story is that when you have similar situations to address specific issues, it is great to say, okay, great, I know which code works. I don't need to know what this code does. I just need to explain to it This is the issue. This code addresses that issue. Paste that code in the chat when you are trying to troubleshoot that issue, and it will recognize that code and find, oh, okay, great. I see exactly how this code addresses that issue and implements it into this implementation of that block. I hope that this video has been helpful. Thank you for watching.